Hi everyone! Before we dive into this week's episode, please check out our promo of the week.
This season on DNA ID, a couple shot at a campground, a realtor waylaid at a home showing, a bookstore owner stabbed among her volumes, a young soldier dumped in a parking lot. What do all these tragic cases have in common? They are all cold cases solved after decades of frustration and futility by forensic genealogy. I'm Jess Betancourt, and in Season 2 of DNA ID, I'll bring you 24 more fascinating cases in which the killer eluded generations of investigators until science and some crafty genealogists cracked them at long last. Listen to DNA ID on your favorite podcast platform. New episodes drop every other Monday.
CrimeDivers. I'm Laura.
And I'm Jill.
Thanks for joining us today for another episode.
Hello, thank you for coming back, or if you're a newbie, then welcome.
Welcome to our podcast.
Yeah.
And as always, we always start off with where in the world are we?
So today we are in the UK.
Okay, and title?
A Peeping Tom.
Ooh, a Peeping Tom.
I have no idea what this episode's about.
Well, that's really not helpful when you're the one that's telling the story.
I know, well, the thing is, our returning listeners will already know, but if you're new here, Laura went to Florida a few weeks ago. We had a few weeks off because she was living it up in America. So we had a break. But I thought, well, you know what, I'll write a couple of episodes just to, give us a head start in season 6. So I wrote this way back, like
6 weeks ago?
6 weeks ago, something like that.
And anybody that knows Jill knows she's got a really rubbish memory, so actually it's not surprising. So this is going to be a surprise to you as it is to me.
It's a new case. Mind you, I could say that I wrote something yesterday and I wouldn't remember it, so
this is true.
I don't know why I use it as an excuse that it was a few weeks ago.
Your memory is just awful, so...
It's so bad, but, we'll learn about this case together then.
Why not? Shall we dive in?
Let's dive in. So Colette Aram was born on the 3rd of February 1967. She lived in Keyworth, Nottinghamshire, which is in the English Midlands. So when Colette was growing up in the 70s and 80s, this village was picturesque, had a low crime rate, and it was like a lovely rural place to live. Mm-hmm. It felt safe, nearly everybody knew everybody else, it was friendly. How many cases start off like this?
God, it's always the quiet places, isn't it?
It is. It's scary. Mm-hmm. So this case happened on the 30th of October 1983. So before I get into what happened to Colette, I'm going to tell you about her friend Karen Willis's experience that day.
Okay.
So she was a typical 16-year-old. She did what most teenagers in the UK did on a Sunday evening in the 80s. I know I was.
I'm like, what?
Well, Laura wasn't a teenager in the 80s.
No.
So she wouldn't know. I was.
In
the late 80s. Yeah. We listened to the charts on the radio.
Ah, right.
To see who was number one that week. So...
We did do that in the 90s as well.
Oh, well, this was the 80s that I'm talking about, though. So she did what everybody in the 80s did. So for anybody who doesn't know... well, I don't know if it was a worldwide... I don't know, do they have that? Basically, in the UK, they have... I don't know if they still do it, but they have a chart show every Sunday, and it's the top 40 songs.
And there's a number one song at the end.
Yeah, so basically, the countdown from 40... down to number one. And what we used to do was we would have our ghetto blaster.
A ghetto blaster? Jeez, you're showing your age now.
I know. And we would listen to the radio, and then we would record the songs that we liked on a tape.
Yeah.
On a cassette tape.
Uh-huh.
Oh God, I am showing my age, aren't I? Uh-huh. And it would be a rush to get there before you could hear the host speaking. You only wanted the music, and that was it.
You didn't want the presenter on it.
Yeah, you didn't want the presenter on it. So yeah. And then you would have a tape of all your favourite songs from the charts.
Whereas now you can just press the little button and play it.
But that's what most teenagers did at this time, including myself. I used to love it. Every Sunday I'd be sitting on the floor of my bedroom next to my ghetto blaster. So if you're interested, it was Chameleon by Culture Club that was number one that day.
There you go.
Yeah. So I thought you might have liked that little tidbit. So after listening to the charts, Karen set off to go and meet her boyfriend at the local pub. She said walking everywhere was never an issue, because, as we said, it was a small little village.
Yeah, everybody knew
Safe,
everybody.
apparently.
Yeah.
So she went anywhere and everywhere by foot, and she felt comfortable doing so.
Yeah.
So as she was walking, though, there was a car that passed by her. She didn't recognise the car, but the driver beeped the horn at her. So she looked, obviously thinking that it was somebody that she knew, but she was like, no, I don't recognise him. So she just carried on walking down the road, and a bit further down, the same car beeped at her again. It was obviously like driving slowly, sort of behind her. So Karen was feeling really nervous by now, so she just kept like walking as fast as she could, and she could see a couple walking like a bit in front of her. They were walking together, so she wanted to catch up with them. Obviously feel a bit safer. So the car was driving slowly, following her, but she did manage to catch up with the couple, and she got to her boyfriend safely. So that was just a little experience of what happened to her that day. So Karen was best friends with Colette Aram. So they had met at school and they'd grown up together. Karen said they were happy children. They were lucky that they grew up in such a lovely place, and they had wonderful parents, and they just had fun together.
Yeah.
Colette liked riding. She was well behaved at school and at home. She was considerate, kind, gentle, caring. So both girls wanted to be hairdressers when they left school. So Colette started working in a salon, and Karen was going to work in another salon, and they were both going to be attending college together. So they were happy. They were like, this is us set for life.
Yeah.
We're going to go to college. We're going to be hairdressers.
Yeah, then
Sorted. Yeah. So on the 30th of October 1983, the night that Karen had been beeped at and followed by that car. So on that day, Colette had been at the stables. She then went home and got ready to go to her boyfriend's house. Usually he would pick her up, but his car was off the road, so she was going to walk there. So she left her house at 8 p.m. and she was seen at 8:10 turning into a place called Knicker Hill.
Knicker Hill? As in like knickers?
I have to point out that it's not the pants that you wear, it's spelled N with an N, not a K.
Oh, okay.
So it's not like as in your knickers.
Not a pair of pants.
But yeah, I did think that. I thought, well, that's a very strange
Yeah.
name for a place.
Right.
But yeah, so she turned into a place called Knicker Hill. I think it's like a sort of beauty spot.
Right.
And she stopped to talk to some friends there, and then she carried on towards her boyfriend's house. But unfortunately, Colette never arrived at his house, and straight away everyone knew something was wrong, and she would never have just went anywhere without telling anyone. Even if she was, if she was just out and she like maybe just popped into a friend's house, she would phone her mum from her friend's house and say, this is where I am, just because she never wanted her mum to worry. So even if her mum wasn't expecting her home for another couple of hours, she would still say,
oh,
I'm at so-so's house. I would never have thought of doing that when I was young, would you?
Well, no, probably not. But then I was never that far, I suppose. But I mean,
yeah, but I would just never think if it would be different if I was going to be late, and I'd maybe phone. I probably wouldn't anyway because I was a horrible child.
You were a horrible child, and
you
weren't really bothered that mum or dad might have been worried about you. You were just doing what you were doing, and
I was. That is so bad.
You were being quite selfish and just.
And if my children had ever done that to me, they always got told. By this point,
we had phones.
We had mobile phones by this point, but I would always say to them, "You let me know where you are. If you're going to be late, you tell me, you just send me a text, whatever."
Yeah.
But we didn't have that when I was younger, and I was really bad. So, but I can imagine if normal people that are not like me would say if they were going to be late, then they would maybe phone their mum and say, I'm going to be late. But I would never think of just, well, mum is not expecting me anyway, so what's the point of letting her know where I am? Because...
Yeah. Well, that's true. I mean,
so that is really considerate that she did that.
Yeah, because if it was like if you'd been out for a few hours and say you had to be home for 10 o'clock and it was like 8 o'clock, you wouldn't think to phone mum and go,
oh, by the way, I'm going to so-and-so's house.
You're like, well, no, I'm not due home till 10 o'clock.
Exactly.
So it doesn't matter what, I'm just doing whatever I'm doing. I'll be home for 10 o'clock.
Yeah. So I thought that was really considerate, and the fact that this is what Colette did was everybody knew straight away that
another reason why they thought something had happened.
Yeah, exactly. They were like, no, something's not right. So Colette's family called the police, and when the officers arrived, her family and friends made it clear that she wasn't just the kind to disappear. She must be in trouble. So while search parties were out looking for Colette, Karen, her pal, became convinced that the strange car that she'd encountered earlier that evening would give a clue to Colette's whereabouts, because obviously whoever was in that car, it was looking for somebody.
Yeah, like he'd obviously been unsuccessful potentially, and he was, trying again, I suppose.
Yeah, that's what she was thinking. So the next day, the community sprung into action, and everyone was out looking for Colette. And unfortunately, about 1.5 miles from the route that she had taken, Colette's brother found her body. Can you imagine finding your sister's body?
That'd be awful.
She had been raped and strangled to death.
Mm-hmm.
So detectives started to build a case from the evidence up, and what they found out was that a motorist had pestered a young woman in the Keyworth earlier that day.
Mm-hmm.
So, it wasn't just Karen that was getting followed.
Yeah, Colette was just the unfortunate one.
Yeah, exactly.
It went one step further, basically.
Yeah, because they found out that a motorist had pestered a young woman in Keyworth earlier that day, and hours later, Colette had been either abducted or she had accepted a lift. But her friends and family said there was no way that she would have gotten into that car if she didn't know him. There's no way that she would have got into that car of her own accord. She wouldn't have took a lift from a stranger or whatever, assuming it was a stranger. So once it was public knowledge that Colette had been found murdered, the landlady from a pub called the Generous Britain in a nearby village called the police about a man who had been in the pub the night of the murder. So he had sat down and ordered a ploughman's, which for anyone outside of Britain, I don't know, do we have it? Because I think it's a British, yeah, it is a British. I've went on to describe what it is, so I'll just
shut up and describe it.
Yeah. So it's for anyone outside of Britain, right? It's an English cold meal, usually eaten at lunchtime in the pub. It can vary depending on each place that sells it. So I looked on Wikipedia, and on there it's described as an English cold meal based around bread, cheese, and fresh or pickled onions, usually accompanied by butter and pickle, which is a chutney-like condiment. Yes. Additional items can be added, such as ham, green salad, hard-boiled eggs, and apple, and it's usually served with beer.
Yeah, because I don't know about getting in a pub, but obviously at work we do like a ploughman sandwich. So you have like cheese, pickle, there's like salad and stuff in the sandwich. So
yeah. So I just thought it was a bit strange that it was, because as I've just said, it's usually eaten at lunchtime, but this was at night. But this pub must have served
all day or whatever.
Yeah, all day. So this guy ordered his ploughman's, and then he chatted with the landlady, and he drank a glass of fresh orange and lemonade. The landlady said that his demeanour seemed a bit strange, and she said she was a bit alarmed as she noticed that he had blood on his hands.
Right, okay.
So the guy used the toilet, and he must have washed his hand because the blood was gone when he came back. So when she phoned the police, they came out to the pub straight away, and they found a paper towel in the bin in the men's toilets where the guy had obviously washed and dried his hands. Of course, as this was the 80s, there was no DNA analysis yet, but they did keep the paper towel and put it into evidence.
Cool.
So weeks went by and the killer hadn't been caught, but he must have been feeling pretty cocky because the police received a letter with words to the effect of, "You can't catch me."
Right, okay.
But he was making mistakes. Obviously, though, those mistakes wouldn't be discovered for a long time because,
again, they've not got the correct.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's writing. He's using his handwriting. He's writing something like DNA, like fingerprints, all that. But of
at
course,
this moment in time, he's got nothing to worry about because they've not got the equipment to use that against them.
So a criminologist called Jane Monckton Smith said, quote, "Despite what we see represented in a lot of television programmes, it's very unusual for somebody who's committed a murder like this to then taunt the police and send letters. Not only is it an arrogant thing to do, it's an incredibly stupid thing to do, because it gives the police another line of potential forensic evidence.
Yeah.
We can't know exactly why he wrote that letter, but it's almost as if he wanted some recognition for what he'd done. He might have seen it almost as an achievement not to have been caught," end quote. So now the police had blood on a paper towel, fingerprints on the letter that the killer had sent, and of course the killer's handwriting, but they couldn't do anything. They just didn't have the
equipment to basically do anything with it. So
weeks turned into months and then years, and there'd still been no arrest for Colette's murder. The killer had made mistakes, but technology advances would obviously be needed to uncover them. So if the same crime had happened today, one of the first things the police would have been able to do was retrieve DNA from Colette's body, maybe from underneath her fingernails. They'd be able to look at fibres in her body and DNA found in her clothes, but of course those tools just didn't exist back in 1983. So also there was no CCTV, no automatic number plate recognition cameras, no mobile phones, and all the evidence that they can give.
So I do wonder, like, how, you know, like some serial killers that we've known, like that are notorious from like 80s, 90s and that, how they would have gotten on today's world.
Not like, very well, probably.
Because obviously I know there's still criminals in today's world that still get away with stuff, but I do wonder like how the old ones from all those times, how they would have got on, like would they have been able to be as successful in their killing sprees or whatever they've done with today's technology.
I reckon though, like if you had a serial killer now, they would be a lot more careful, wouldn't they? Because they know.
They'd have to adapt to obviously the way that things are now.
Yeah, they would know the advances in technology.
Yeah, but I just wonder if that person back in those days would have been as sick. I mean, I wouldn't obviously don't want to find out, but you know, like the Ted Bundys of this world, like would he have been as successful now than he was like back then?
Hopefully not.
I mean, hopefully not, obviously, but you just.
No, I don't think they would, because as I said, because we've got, you can't, you know, because of DNA and stuff like that, then it's a lot harder to commit crimes and to be a serial killer. I mean, like, that's why all the serial killers are sort of back in the day, because
you don't find as many now, do you?
No.
It's more like just one-off incidences, isn't it, rather than actual serial killers these days.
Yeah.
And probably you're right, that probably is why, because they couldn't get away with what they got away with back then because of the advances in technology that we now have.
Thank God for them.
Which is great. I mean, that we've obviously developed that because, you know, it stopped people that might have been a serial killer.
So, you know, like obviously back then, forensic science was really in its infancy. One retired police officer said, like, if you've got a fingerprint, you were a really lucky detective. So, you know, like, and there was an evidence analysis called Linda Geddes. She said, like, quote, DNA fingerprinting was invented in the mid-80s and started being used towards the end of the 80s. And even then, you needed a large amount of biological material. Today, you can just run a swab over a door handle, pick up a couple of cells and generate a DNA profile from those cells.
Which is crazy to think how amazing that is, though, isn't it? I mean, you know, technology is just so amazing in terms of things like that you can just...
And thank God for that. It's just a pity we didn't have it back, you know, so we could stop all these serial killers and whatnot.
Well, even things like, you know, obviously things with like iPhones and well, not just iPhones, but like, you know, all the mobile phone devices that you can track people on and you can know where somebody is instantly. And
well, a lot of murders do get solved these days because of phones.
Yeah, exactly.
Because like would be people being able to be tracked and stuff like that. You know, with them pinging off the cell towers, like, oh, you said you were like 100 miles away, but you were actually in that place.
And I'm laughing now because I was talking about what I was buying my daughter for Christmas this year, and I've decided to get her one of these watches that basically she can like phone and text from, and obviously I can track her because she's starting to get to an age now where she's, you know, she's going to start asking maybe to, I don't know, walk home from school or go and see her friends that I'm not there. So of course, but I'm like, oh no, I need to know where you are. Obviously she's too young for a phone, etc. So this is like the next best thing. But then I was having that conversation with Mum, and she was like, Jesus, like she was getting sent on a bus on her own when she was like 3-year-old, and she'd
she
would get sent on a bus. Like her mum would send her on a bus to Auntie Winnie or whoever, and they'd pick her up at the other end.
Really?
And I was like, what? But yeah.
At 3?
At 3 years old, I was like, I would never, like, in this day and age, that would never happen. And not.
I mean, I could imagine maybe your daughter's age now, because she's like 7. Maybe if Mum was 7 back then, I would have been more understanding. But 3.
Yeah, that's what she told me. And just things like, you know, she would basically, you know, she would walk to school herself from the day that she, like, apart from the first day that she went to school. Obviously, her mum took her, but then that was it. She was left to her own devices from walking home from school to walking to school, and I just couldn't imagine that in this day and age now. No. It's just like they just were just basically left to fend for themselves almost.
Yeah.
In terms of like doing things, whereas now, like, you know, I couldn't even imagine doing that now. I don't even think I'd let my daughter on a bus on her own now.
No.
And she's 7 years
old.
No,
I wouldn't now. As I said, like maybe way back when we thought things were safer. So maybe if you were talking about Mum, if you'd said to me that Mum had got a bus at 7, then I probably would have been like, fair enough, like, yeah, I can believe that, but
you know what,
no, there's no way.
Put her on the bus, and then obviously, I'm sure it was Auntie Winnie. She said that we'd meet her whenever she was getting off, and that'd be out the other end.
She's just 3's tiny.
Oh, I know. I mean, you can imagine that in this day and age.
No, I don't think that would be allowed. I think if somebody put their 3-year-old on a bus, the bus driver would be like, no.
Oh, yeah, I'm not taking you anywhere.
No.
But it just shows you know, like, how different things were back then, that you can understand how serial killers and that could get away with stuff. Whereas now, because we're all so advanced with technology that you can know somebody's like whereabouts instantly and stuff, it's, you know, and I'm glad for that personally. I'm personally glad for all the technology that we have, because you know, at the end of the day, I do, you know, I'm prepared to allow my daughter like freedoms as she get older, but I still want that comfort of knowing that I know where she is, or that she can get in touch with me if anything's like wrong or whatever. You know, whereas they wouldn't have had that back in
So this is why I feel so like, which I kind of feel guilty now. Like, you know, we've talked about it before that I was a horrible child, and I just think, how did Mum cope with not knowing where I was? And
but
like,
then I suppose if she grew up with that herself, maybe she wasn't so like, she was more laid back about it. Whereas because obviously for me, you know, I've grown up with sort of a lot of the technologies and stuff, and you know, I'm used to all that, and that's, you know, maybe that's why I feel differently about it. I don't know, maybe she is. I don't know.
Don't know, but if I ever did phone her to tell her where I was, I used to have to go to like a public phone box.
I don't know.
To go and phone her. Needed like 10p to go and
I remember we had the reverse the call charge thing where I could just type in a code in the phone box and it would just charge their
Yeah, I didn't have that. That was a new development. I was like, I didn't have that. Or maybe Mum was just like, no. Pay for it yourself.
Crazy to think that you just allow your kids just to be anywhere and you had no idea where they were.
Yeah. Oh, aye. Mum never had any clue where I was. I'd be like, oh, I'm going to so-and-so's house, and I'd be nowhere near so-and-so's house. I'd maybe go and get them.
Yeah.
Go to that person's house, say, right, you coming out? And then we'd end up God knows where.
Exactly.
But that's just the way it was, I suppose.
Yeah,
Right, anyway,
exactly. So we've went right off track there. Let's back to the case.
So Colette's murder was actually the first case to appear on the British TV show Crime Watch.
Oh, yeah.
So for those outside the UK, Crime Watch would reconstruct unsolved crimes to try and get help from the public to get them solved. So the presenter on Crime Watch showed the letter that the killer had written, asking if anyone recognised the handwriting. So I watched I watched, because it's on YouTube, so I watched the Crime Watch episode, and they said that 7 months and 2,000 statements later, they still hadn't found the killer. So that's when it was, like, it was on Crime Month?
Crime Watch?
Yeah, 7 months after the murder.
Right, okay.
So 2,000 statements, they still hadn't found the killer. So he was described as being white, aged roughly between 25 to 35, with probably brown wavy hair. So Crime Watch said that the police had built up a picture of the killer's movements from the letter and from corroborating, I knew I was going to say that, corroborating evidence. So I'll tell you what they said. So it started at so this is the picture that they've built up of his movements. So it started at the riding stables, 5 miles from Keyworth, because part of the letter said, I was in a hut for hours waiting for a girl to return from horse riding.
Right,
no one saw me.
Right, okay.
So police searched like huts at local riding stables, and they found that one had a rag and it was stained with human semen. So he must have been watching girls like riding, you know, on the horses and that, and like basically getting off on it.
Okay.
Another bit of the letter said, this is him saying, when the car came with the keys, I could not help take it. So basically, somebody had pulled up in a car, which is a red Fiesta, and had got out, but they'd left the keys in it.
Right.
So the man who had been hiding in the shed
stole the car.
So that was about 4:30 in the afternoon of Colette's murder. So the next time the stolen car was seen was about half an hour later on an estate in Keyworth. The car was parked on a street for about an hour, and a witness gave a description of the driver. So of course, like, it was sitting there for about an hour, but they didn't know that, he hadn't done anything by this point, so it's not like they could just go and say, right, what are you up to?
Yeah.
So between 6:20 and 7:20 that evening, the suspect cruised the neighbourhood trying to pick up young girls. One girl was out walking her dog, and he stopped and asked her for directions for a street that was only 50 yards away, and he'd probably just passed it. So it was obviously just an excuse to try and talk to her. And he asked her if she wanted a lift, which I'm like, she's out walking her dog. Yeah, why would she want a lift? That's stupid.
The whole point is you're out exercising your dog.
Exactly. So of course she said no, and he kept trying to persuade her to get into the car, and she's like, no, like I'm out for a walk with my dog. Like, I don't need a lift anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just out for a walk. So eventually he did give up, and he drove off. And then the letter was referenced again when he said, no one knows what I look like. It is why you've not got me. So, but he was obviously a bit stupid if he didn't realise that people wouldn't have come forward and gave descriptions of him trying to pick up young girls. Because he's saying, oh, nobody knows what I look like. And it's like,
well, they must. Somebody must.
You've been trying to pick up girls. People have been getting a good look at you. They're going to give a description. You know, and the fact that he had blood on his hands in the pub, like, later on and stuff, like, so he was obviously stupid.
Clearly.
So about 8 p.m. he was seen again. A guy was in his garden, and the suspect parked the stolen car outside this guy's house, and he got out of the car, said to the guy, "Oh, I'm just parking here, I'm just visiting a friend," and he walked round the guy was like, "All right, okay." And he walked round the corner, and then he come back a couple of minutes later and said to the guy, "Oh, my friend wasn't in." But the police said he couldn't have been going to someone's house because there wasn't any houses in that vicinity.
Oh.
Like where he actually, I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was just fields or something like that.
No,
but
okay.
yeah, like, so it was just weird that he would say to the guy who was in his garden, "I'm going to visit a friend," when obviously that guy who lived there would know that there was no houses round there. So it's just
a bit random.
As I said, I think he was just stupid. And the witness, the guy that was in his garden, he noticed that the suspect was carrying a knife. So he took a note of the car registration number, because obviously he was like,
bit dodgy.
Maybe he was thinking, wait a minute, there's no houses round there. You're not going to visit somebody. You've got a knife in your hand. Good thinking. But of course it was a stolen car. But he wouldn't have known that at the time.
Because he would have reported it, and I'm assuming they would have contacted the owner and realised that
it was stolen. So about 8:15, some people in their houses in the estate, they actually did hear a female screaming and a car screeching away, but no one reported it until after the news of Colette's murder, because
again, it's one of those things, like, I mean, I've heard screaming in my street, but sometimes it could be just a kid screaming because they're playing about, or I think the other day me and my daughter were in the house, and we were just sitting colouring in at the kitchen table before dinner was ready, and we had a bit of music on, so we couldn't hear it clearly, but she's like, "Oh, mummy, like, I can hear something," and I turned the volume down, and there was a man was shouting, and there was a woman sort of shouting like, I don't know if we were having an argument, but I didn't really think to go and look, because I'm like, oh, it's just somebody probably having an argument. Like, it's not. I didn't think that's necessarily somebody's going to be getting murdered or taken away or whatever. So you don't really think about it. And then maybe if I had heard something on the radio going, "Oh, somebody was abducted and where I stay," and then I'm like, "Oh, well, maybe that was something to do with it." So then I could understand why you would report it afterwards.
Exactly. That's exactly what happened. You don't. And the people said that, like, "Oh, we just thought it was like young people just mucking about, just
because you don't think something terrible is going to happen, do you? You just think it's life and that's what happens.
Obviously there's noises outside.
Yeah, exactly.
You hear noises from cars. You hear noises from people having arguments or kids mucking about screaming.
Yeah, exactly.
But it must have been Colette being abducted. But of course nobody.
Nobody could have imagined that at the end of the day.
So then about 9 p.m, that's when the suspect went into the pub. So the police were pretty sure that the suspect lived locally at the time of the murder, and they appealed to the public on Crime Watch, saying that they were looking for someone who was away from his home on the 30th of October 1983 from between 4:30 when the car was stolen and 10 p.m. when the car was seen coming back into Keyworth.
Right.
So Keyworth had a population of about 4,000, and every single man in the community, except for one, of course, was innocent. But of course the police would be having to check them all out. So there were about 1,500 people that might have been potential suspects. I mean, that's a lot, 1,500. But there were hundreds of other witnesses to be interviewed. But investigations and interviews that followed the Crime Watch appeal just didn't lead to any arrests.
Sure, they didn't have CCTV in at that point, really, because
I know.
I'm sure all pubs probably do have CCTV now, and you would be able to identify somebody very quickly. But
so as the years passed, the investigation continued to draw blanks, and the people of Keyworth still had a killer living amongst them. Science was improving, and fast forward 20 years, police tried again. They had another look at the evidence, and they swabbed the letter that the killer had sent them. They also looked at Colette's clothes and retrieved DNA from them, and they looked at the paper towel with the blood on it as well. So from these three sources, they could put together a DNA profile of the possible killer. Unfortunately, though, although they had that, they didn't have anybody to match it to, because obviously...
Yeah, it's all very well getting a profile, but unless you've got somebody to match it to,
exactly.
It's still not good to you, is it?
So another few years went by, and by 2008, anyone who got arrested was getting swabbed to get their DNA. Now, actually, sorry, I'm just going to go off one, but our last episode, although it was in Australia, we were saying when people get arrested, do they not get their their DNA, take their fingerprints and all the rest of it? But that was back in 2001, I think. So maybe
it didn't happen back
then. Maybe
then.
It wasn't happening back then.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was last.
But obviously, it clearly does happen now.
Yeah, so from 2008, everybody who gets arrested was getting their DNA taken.
Mm-hmm.
So one person got arrested for a driving offence. So he was taken to the police station and swabbed, and his name was John Paul Hutchinson. An analysis of his DNA profile showed a lot of similarities with the DNA profile that had been retrieved from exhibits around Colette's murder. So, as it didn't match completely, and John Paul was too young to have committed Colette's murder anyway, because he was only 20 when he got arrested. The police realised that he was most likely related to the killer.
Oh, wow.
So
actually, a relation's going to be the downfall of this guy by the sounds of it.
Which...
So you could keep yourself out of trouble, fine and dandy, but if a relation of yours gets in trouble, then you could be a
But how good is that? That can happen.
Like,
I was actually listening to a podcast not that long ago. I think it was a Welsh serial killer, I think it was, and the same thing happened, but unfortunately the killer had already died by the time, but at least it was the murder was solved, obviously for the family, but unfortunately he died. But that was the same thing, it was a relation had obviously been arrested for something.
So you can keep your nose clean, but if your family don't,
so just didn't commit crimes.
Well, no, I mean that would be the sensible thing to do, right?
Yeah. So once forensic experts have identified that someone might be a relative of the person that committed the crime, there are other DNA tests that can be done. Mm-hmm. So one of them is a Y chromosome testing. So usually when a DNA profile is generated, they look at like little markers across all the chromosomes.
Right.
And in this type of test, they're looking at just the Y chromosome. The Y chromosome is what males carry. So females have 2 X chromosomes, male have an X chromosome and a Y chromosome. Mm-hmm. And that Y chromosome is important because a copy of it is passed down the male line.
Right, okay.
So when John Paul's was tested, they could look at other male relatives and get a stronger idea of whether this person really is related or not. Mm-hmm. So, police arrested John Paul's dad, Paul Stuart Hutchinson. Now, he denied murder and he blamed it on his brother, saying that the DNA profile they had must have been his. But unfortunately, his brother was now dead, so... what can you do?
That's an easy way to blame somebody, isn't it? That somebody that's dead.
Yeah, but what he didn't realise was that the police had his DNA. The police had his brother's DNA on file, and it wasn't a match. So he was. Imagine trying to blame your dead brother. That's awful.
Lucky for him, they did have his profile already then.
There was a fingerprint on the letter that the killer had written to police, and funnily enough, that matched Paul's. Oh, as did the DNA on Colette's clothes and on the paper towel. So at last they had found the killer. Mm-hmm. So Paul Hutchinson was a local. He lived just a few streets away from Colette. Mm-hmm. He seemed like a normal man next door. He was married, he had children, he had a job. There was just nothing about him that made him stand out. He wasn't like a wrong'un or anything like that. He was just a normal guy.
Mm-hmm. How many times does that happen though, isn't it?
So they're the ones you have to look out for. Mm-hmm. So to locals, he was a 24-year-old who said he had graduated? Yeah, I was actually just wondering, I'm just going to let you guess what that word was. He was a 24-year-old at the time, obviously. Yeah.
At the time, yeah.
He had graduated in psychology before training as an electrician and settling early into family life. However... in his spare time, he liked to hide out in sheds watching young girls riding horses. So criminologist Jane Monckton-Smith said, quote, "This man certainly had sexual problems. He had sexual paraphilia, also known as sexual fetishism," end quote. So he'd hide away in like stables and in woods and like there were lots of like farms and fields outside the village, so that gave him plenty of opportunity to hide and watch girls riding because there was plenty of space for the to go horse riding, so he'd just hide and watch them and do his thing.
Right.
So the day after Colette's body was found, Paul told his wife that he had a job which would take him away from Keyworth for a little while.
Convenient.
Mm-hmm. He went away for about 5 weeks, obviously so that he was out of the way while police were doing their initial inquiries.
Yeah.
Former detective Peter Blexley said he was sure that Paul was enjoying some kind of weird and perverted adrenaline rush not long after the murder, and he was probably restraining himself from telling someone about what he'd done because he was probably proud of what he's done and that he hadn't been caught, but of course he wouldn't want to risk them gassing him up.
No.
So, and that's why he wrote the letter. So rather than actually telling somebody, exactly. He was like, well, I need to tell somebody, but it's going to have to be anonymous. So that's when he wrote the letter to the police, because he was obviously feeling cocky about them not catching him. Not one person suspected him, not the police, not his family or friends. So he just went on with life as normal, and he'd got away with murder, for now.
Wow.
So after the Crime Watch appeal, he did start to worry, because lots of men were being questioned and interviewed, and obviously he didn't want to speak to the police. So he made up a story so that he wouldn't have to. He told his family that he had lung cancer.
Right.
And he had to go away for treatment. He even pulled tufts of his hair out so that people would think that that was the effect of the cancer treatment. Like, how sick can you get? So off he toddled to who knows where. But by doing that, he wasn't interviewed by the police, obviously. And if they did knock at his door, if they were doing like door-to-door inquiries after the Crime Watch appeal, then there was a legitimate reason for him to be away, because his family would say, well, no, he's got lung cancer, he's away for treatment. And the police wouldn't think anything of it, probably, if it was just door-to-door inquiries, I mean, obviously, if they specifically thought it was him, then that would be a different matter, but the fact that...
But then I'm surprised they wouldn't say, okay, can you let us know when he's home or back?
Well, maybe they did, but he was away for now, so...
Oh, who goes actually, like, away for weeks at a time for... I mean, did he say he was in hospital, or...?
Well, it must have been, because he was away for treatment. So, as the time went by and police weren't getting anywhere, Paul, he was like, all right, obviously the heat's died down.
Yeah, I'm good
He
now.
returned to the area and just picked up his life. So, his marriage broke down, so they got divorced and he married again. He had more children, including John Paul, the one who'd gotten arrested.
Yeah.
So, he worked as an electrician, a salesman, and he even served as a school governor.
Wow.
So, yeah, he had just murdered this one girl and then just went back and picked up his life as normal.
Yeah.
So anyway, he'd murdered Colette in 1983, and he was eventually charged in April 2009, so 26 years later. So he initially pleaded not guilty, but in December 2009 he changed his plea to guilty, and on the 25th of January 2010 he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years. Colette's family wanted to know why he had murdered her, but he refused to answer.
Yeah, so frustrating.
I know. But he only served a few months of his sentence, though, because in October that year, he killed himself.
Honestly.
He had managed to save up tablets in prison, and once he had enough, he took an overdose. So he must have hidden those tablets pretty well. Paramedics were called, and they tried to resuscitate him, but he died in the ambulance on the way to hospital. But I'm glad they found out eventually who did it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad for the family's sake that they, I suppose, got the closure in the sense of they knew who done it. They still wouldn't have had the closure of the why, and obviously the man didn't exactly suffer very much because he
didn't serve his sentence. So
well, he carried on for life for 20-odd years, 25 years, 26 years, whatever it was.
26 years.
26 years, and then served a few months in prison for his crime and then killed himself. He copped out.
Exactly. I just feel so sorry for her family, because as I said, they got to find out who did it, but they didn't find out why, and as I said, he wasn't punished for it.
Well, not really, no, was he? Because he just, he'd lived a good life after, and the years afterwards, and then
I know,
and then obviously committed suicide after a few months in prison. So that's not really justice, I wouldn't say.
No, definitely not. So yeah, but I that case just caught my eye just because it was the first case to ever be on Crime Watch. That's why it kind of.
I just wonder what drove him to go. I mean, it was obviously, yes, he had this fetish thing about watching girls riding horses or whatever, but what then made him take a big step further to kill obviously this one girl? But then that was it. Like, there was no more from that. Like, he just.
I found that strange as well. That he just kind of did it and then went back to life as normal. I just wonder. Obviously, we're never going to know because he wouldn't tell why. But maybe he intended on raping her, because he did, and maybe she struggled that much that he just lost it, and because if she was fighting back and he's just lost it, and in the heat of the moment he strangled her, and then
obviously didn't want to do that again, maybe
maybe he was like, shit, like maybe he did feel, I don't want to give him any credit though, really, so, but because he never done it again, because you would think that
Well, just because
if he'd done it and got away with it, then maybe he would feel cocky and go and do it again.
Just because with him having a fetish of the whole looking at girls sort of thing, you know, was that a step further in his fetish, you know, to sort of, you know, actually rape a girl or whatever, and you know.
But then maybe it was too far. Maybe he's done it and it's went too far, and that's why he's never done it again. Because you would think that, as I say, because he'd got away with it, then maybe he would, I've got away with it, I'm going to do that again. So I'm kind of wondering if maybe the intent wasn't to murder her. Mm-hmm. But I don't really, as I said, I don't want to really give him any credit to think that he might have had any sort of feelings about regret or anything like that. I mean, at the end of the day, he done it.
Yeah, he killed a girl.
And then tried to blame his dead brother when he got caught.
I know.
And he also...
Faked he had lung cancer.
Faked that he had cancer. I mean, what a horrible man.
To just try and preserve his life. And, you know, probably feel sorry about maybe for his family, his own family, because if he's obviously been married, had kids, and they've been totally unaware of...
Thinking that he'd had cancer.
Yeah, but totally unaware of what he's done.
Mm-hmm. You know, he's just lived a lie, basically. Mm-hmm. Like, that, you know... Imagine finding out that you've just been arrested for a driving conviction, which, you know, that
could have been anything. Could have been speeding. Could have
been... Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not... I'm saying it's not a big deal, but you know what I mean, compared to murder and rape and all that kind of thing. That could happen to anybody. And imagine finding out from that, you just find out that your dad is not the person that you thought he was.
Yeah, totally.
And that he's lied to you, he's been living... You know, he's a murderer. Imagine finding that out.
Yeah, because obviously at the end of the day, that family... has lost him from their lives as well, because, you know, that would have been... I mean, like saying it, that would be awful. And then obviously he kills himself as well. I mean, for them, I feel sorry for.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you have to feel sorry for...
He's not just hurt, like, another stranger's family, you know, by killing his girl. He's obviously hurt his own family in some ways as well. So all round, he's...
That's the same for any murderer, really, isn't it? Like, you know, that you're not just hurting the person and the person's family that you're doing it to, you're hurting your own family and whatnot. Exactly. It's just, but yeah, he was a monster, and the fact that he didn't even pay for it is just awful.
No, not exactly. That's what annoys me. You know, obviously you can't change what's actually happened in the crime itself, but actually the aftermath in it, when these people don't get what they deserve justice-wise, then that does frustrate me, because it, you know, you feel like he's almost, he has got away with it, yeah, hasn't he? And, you know, the poor victim's family and the victim themselves, you know, they didn't get away with anything. You know, the victims lost their life, and the families had to suffer in the years, you know,
the years afterwards, not knowing who it was, not knowing why, and then finding out who did it, but still not knowing why.
Exactly.
That must be awful to not know why.
I know.
But anyway, so thank you to everybody for listening. If you would like to follow us on social media, we are on Instagram and Twitter, crime_divers_pod. Email is crime_divers_pod@outlook.com. Facebook, no, not Facebook. YouTube and TikTok or Crime Divers Podcast. If you'd like bonus episodes or early access ad-free episodes, we're patreon.com/CrimeDivers. If you'd like to buy us a coffee, we are coffee.com/CrimeDivers. I was doing quite well there.
I know you were. And if you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe, rate and review.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.